So you're a sketchy businessman first.
Yeah. Well,
and then you became a
I
savvy businessman.
Right. Yeah. Savvy now. Yeah. I think my first business model I can remember, I was in first grade selling like the candy bar fundraisers,
Yeah.
I was upcharging people and pocketing the difference so I could win the contest.
Amazing.
Yeah. To me, that made perfect sense.
All right. Welcome to the Artful Dollar podcast. I'm Ryan Roy, your host, your tattoo artist sometimes, your financial coach sometimes, and you're probably here listening to this because you don't want to talk to Chad from Fidelity in a blazer about finances. That's usually why people come to me, and that's why I started this podcast, so that we can have conversations about money, adjacent to money, in new, different ways, shine a new light on the conversation so that we can start to think and act and be with money in a new way, because I think the old way that we've been doesn't really work for everyone. And so that's really the point of this podcast. And I invited a guest today who is someone who wears many hats, has worn many hats throughout his life. And I just really admire him as an artist, as a businessman, and as a teacher. And he's got a good, mission and what he cares about sharing in the world. He's very generous with his knowledge and experience. And so that's why I'm excited to share with you. Our guest today is Nick Moran. And you're still in Tennessee. Is that right, Nick?
Yeah, I'm in Knoxville,
Tennessee. Yeah, I just sort of reached out to you randomly. I love that we can just DM anyone we want and maybe they'll get back to us. Or did you DM me? I can't remember now. Did you DM me or how did we get connected?
I found you on another, like a tattoo meme page or something.
Okay,
and reposted you sharing your content. And I was like, this guy is like someone I need to get connected with, because it's so hard to find people that are into finances and also into tattooing. So I reached out to you.
That's right.
And we got connected that way.
And then I just learned a little bit about you, and I was like, oh, wow, he's a tattooer, but you're a very savvy businessman. And did one of those come first for you? Were you a tattooer and then a savvy businessman, or were you kind of always interested in entrepreneurship, or did that just arise simultaneously?
Sans the word savvy, I've always been in business, but I feel like I didn't really get a fully grasp on it until I was into tattooing, and as all tattooers must do, run their own business full time. I had some music venues that were definitely sketchy and not legal as a teenager.
So you're a sketchy businessman first.
Yeah, well,
then you became a savvy businessman.
Right. Yeah, savvy now. Yeah, I think my first business model I can remember, I was in first grade selling like the candy bar fundraisers.
Yeah.
I was upcharging people and pocketing the difference so I could win the contest.
Amazing.
Yeah, to me that made perfect sense, and people were happy to give me $1.50 instead of $1 for the candy bar.
Yeah.
I'd upsell we could do 2 for $3. And
that's it.
Really, it just kind of came natural for me.
That's funny, dude. One of the most I don't know that it went viral, but one of the most popular posts I ever did on Instagram was there. I was on the subway and there was this little kid selling chocolate bars, and he was selling them for, I think, $1.50 or $2 or whatever the deal was, right? And I told the kid, I was like, look, if you tell people it's 2 for $3 or 2 for $5 or whatever the deal was, a little discount, you'll sell more bars, you'll make more money. And he's like, okay. And he turned around and he said it to the guy right after he sold me the chocolate bars. And then he turned around, he winked at me. It was so cute. He's 8-year-old boy.
I love that.
And I shared that story on Instagram, and people were just flipping about it. So that's cool to picture little Nick hustling chocolate bars. I was also kind of naturally business trading. I had some story about I traded some squirrel bones with a store, the Evolution store, at maybe 11 years old or something like that. And it was just, I don't know, I just was making deals. It just kind of came naturally to me. So
I wonder sometimes if it's genetic coding or if it's, just environmental, you pick up on certain cues. It could be, small throughout your childhood. Yeah, it's really cool to meet people that it comes naturally for, because I feel like it comes naturally in different ways for people. When hearing their beginner story of how they got into business has always been inspiring to me.
Yeah, that was the first deal I ever made. It was trading bones, squirrel bones. For a tarantula in a jar. That's what I got. I traded some squirrel bones. So
that's a good deal.
It was a good deal. I thought so.
Yeah, congrats.
It is interesting that not everyone. I mean, because I didn't inherit it from my parents. My parents weren't entrepreneurs or dealers. Was that something you were exposed to growing up, or just? Where do you think that came from?
It's hard for me to say. My dad was definitely a businessman. He, worked management positions, corporate ladder, started businesses, sold them, had some fail, had some do well. But he was always just like kind of grinding, and eventually leaned heavy into owning his own restaurant franchises and real estate. And that's when like I remember him becoming entrepreneurial. I was maybe a early teenager, 13, 14 around that time. And I mean, I definitely took notes. He had me and my siblings working with him through the summer and on weekends and sometimes early in the morning before school. Yeah, it's hard to say where it comes from.
But you were exposed to it at an early age, and then did you always love it or did you resist it at some point? I mean, if you're like opening up like sketchy music venues, I'd imagine there's some like, I'm not going to follow the standard business model path, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I didn't realize how much crossover there was at the time, but I wanted to be everything that wasn't corporate America. So to me, that was like, playing in bands, doing tattoos, making art. I would like make clothes sometimes, cut stuff up, sew it together, and then running music venues. And it wasn't until I'd been doing that a few years that I realized like I was fully engulfed in capitalism and that I really loved it. I loved, managing the bands I was in and booking tours and, getting guarantee contracts signed just as much as I love playing shows.
I also, again, so many similarities. I basically was like, 19 getting my neck and arms tattooed because I was like, I don't want to ever work in a corporate job. I want to sign the contract that says you never get a normal job, Yeah. And then later, after 13 years of tattooing, I got my financial advisor's license and ended up working for a wealth management firm. So I failed my 19-year-old dreams. But this has come up with other guests on the podcast. Me and Nick Baxter were talking about like the conflict of coming from a sort of anti-capitalist background, but then realizing that actually this capitalism thing can be a fun game. Can you tell me a little bit about like that experience for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's an experience I'm still, building upon and learning as I go. I, of course, try to be as ethical as possible in all my business ventures and really focus on, generosity and, empathy, figuring out where, employees' positions coming from and also customers. Yeah. The journey, I think, really started when I moved out on my own and was having to eat and put gas in my car and, accumulate adult bills, rent, car insurance and all that as they come, and realizing that I had to make a decision of, being a train hopper. I remember at the moment I was sitting at the river in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, just contemplating life. I was like, do I just hop the next train and do my thing, or do I, get a job and start paying bills and join the rat race? I chose a job because family. I have 2 kids, and I was like, yeah, I definitely don't want to be that dad that like skipped town and no one ever saw again. It was a pretty easy decision for me.
I know it's a weird question, but like if you didn't have kids, do you think it might have gone a different way?
It's hard for me to say for sure, but I mean, I run into people my age now still that don't have kids, and they're just I had a guest artist at the shop. He left this morning. He's moving to Thailand just because.
Right. Hop the next train
and I think
to Thailand.
I absolutely would have done the same. I love exploring, love adventure, love being new places, learning new things. So travel and journey has always been a passion of mine. It's taken me a while to find the balance between like being a business owner and planting roots and, a stable father, and then also, scratching my itch to explore the unknown.
Yeah. If you could say like, what is the thing that motivates you in, I don't know, in life? It could be in art and business. Maybe they're different things, but what would you say is it that motivates you to do what you do the way you do it? Because you've accomplished a lot in a short period of time, from what I understand, and we can get into the details of all that. But what is that motivator?
The core motivator is happiness, as I feel, most people's decision making is likely motivated by. But my happiness comes from the freedom to do what I want when I want. I found that the easiest, the path of least resistance to do so is to have enough money to do so. And with that, I spend time balancing, what is a true want and what is just like an impulse want, what's going to actually bring me happiness and what's just going to, be a fun moment that will be forgotten. So I roughly calculate projected expenses. I do this occasionally from, the moment that I'm making the calculation until I think I'm going to die. Calculate all expenses, food, potential healthcare, housing, adjusted for inflation on all of expenses. And when I come to a dollar amount, I say I need to keep doing what I'm doing until I reach that amount. And then once I reach that amount, I feel as if I can finally be free and not enchained by capitalism, be able to make my own decisions throughout my day, not base my decisions on how much money I need to make.
Do you have fun in playing the game of capitalism? Or is it simply a means to an end of freedom?
No, I do enjoy it. I'd like to take it as far as I can in my lifetime. And once I have enough, I want to give back. That's the second motivator. I feel like if I don't have like a primary goal that I'm working towards, I start to slip into depression, I need some sort of like adversity in my life that I'm fighting against. That's what like gives me energy and keeps me happy. So once I have enough, I want to start taking care of others the best way I can find fit in that moment.
Well, let's dive into some adversity that motivated you. So bring me back to, the wherever you feel is an appropriate starting point in your tattoo career or in your business career. Tell me a little bit about how it all started.
I'll go back to when I was 16 up to 18. I was playing music. Couldn't wait to get out of high school. I enjoyed the socializing aspect of high school, but didn't enjoy the, having to be somewhere at a certain time and do things that I didn't want to do. That's always been a character trait of mine. Playing music and going to shows was kind of like an escape for me. And like I had mentioned earlier, I really enjoyed the management side. My first, I guess, semi-legit business was selling like shirt designs and band logos and stuff from my MySpace account. My parents, they didn't trust PayPal, and I was too young to have a bank account. So I'd have to have my clients mail me paper checks and my parents would cash them for me. And that was like my fun money. Once in the music scene, I realized if I was going to look like a rock star, I needed to start getting tattooed, right?
Yeah.
So I started getting tattooed as soon as I turned 18. I got one when I was 17, but it was a rough experience. So I was like, I'll just wait till I'm 18 and go to a shop for the next one. And then I spent a little bit of time in the tattoo shop, got tattooed, once a month for a few months. I was sleeping behind a tattoo shop at my friend's house. He was the vocalist for my band at the time. I was staying on his couch.
What was the name of your band?
That band was Ageless Entity.
Ageless Entity.
Yeah.
Nice.
It was named after a Magic the Gathering card.
So good.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, I would go and hang out at the tattoo shop. The manager of that shop was a vocalist for a different band called Skew, and we'd play with them sometimes in Knoxville. He was cool with us just like hanging out and shop ratting and whatnot. I asked him for an apprenticeship because I decided it would be a cool idea if I could tattoo when we weren't playing shows, weren't on the road, and then, have that flexibility in my schedule, that freedom, if you will, was what attracted me to tattooing, kind of the pirate life. He told me no. He said I was too nice of a kid. He didn't want to ruin me. And it broke my heart. But that was like the first adversity, I would say, is like, okay, like I have to like break into this industry somehow. So I started just traveling any direction I could. I drive usually 4 or 5 hours in any direction from East Tennessee, and stop at tattoo shops along the way. This was MapQuest days. So I just kind of like wander around, car camp when I needed to. Probably went to about 30 tattoo shops, just, a nobody wandering in being like, hey, will you teach me to tattoo? I got a few, get the hell out, and a lot of like polite, like, no, not interested.
You said roughly 30 shops, you said?
Yeah, I would say within like a 3 or 4 hour radius of East Tennessee, just stop at random cities, random towns. If I saw a tattoo sign, I was pulling in, asking them to teach me to tattoo. Instagram wasn't out. And I think I'd seen, it's like an MTV show where this kid's dad like took him to a tattoo shop and asked him for an apprenticeship. I'd seen that. And that was really my only experience on how the process went. So I thought you just like walk in and ask.
I think a lot of people don't. I think if more people did that, they'd have an easier time getting an apprenticeship.
Just walking in and asking?
You just walking in and asking, and, maybe coming in with something, and I do think developing that relationship certainly makes it easier, but, getting an apprenticeship. I never had a real apprenticeship. I actually worked in tattoo shops before I started tattooing and learned a little through osmosis, but, so many people out there are like, how do you get an apprenticeship? And they're like emailing or something. And I'm like, I feel like you kind of got to go in person. I think that is probably one of the easier ways to get it.
Yeah. I mean, it was difficult for me at the time. Maybe I was going in the wrong shops, or maybe it was just, the way I was presenting myself.
Well, I think it just also takes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 goes at it. I don't think I think you had the right mentality, I think, is you're like, I'm just going to keep doing this until I get the result. And I think a lot of people might do 4 or 5 shops to get turned down, and then they just give up.
Yeah, that could be the case. And I've heard similar stories now that I think about it. I was actually almost to that point where I was like, maybe I need to look into something else. Like, this isn't working. And that was over, I don't know, maybe 6 months, and came back to the shop that I was getting tattooed at. It was called American Rebel Tattoo in Pigeon Forge, and it's still there, still open. And I was telling the guys there, that I'd befriended, what I was dealing with. And one artist in specific, Eric Lane, I really connected with him. He had just moved from Oakland. He was just like a 90s punk. We had similar taste in music, similar taste in tattoos. He said, dude, you need to ask Phil. And Phil was the shop manager because Matt had left the shop at that point, the old manager that we played music with. And Phil was like kind of the old new school guy, kind of stayed in his room, kept to himself, didn't really talk much, didn't really have a relationship with him at all. So I went in his room about him and I was like, Phil, will you teach me to tattoo? And he was like, how old are you? And I said, 18. He's like, come back when you're 25. I was like, why is that? And he was like, I've had 18-year-old apprentices. They're too much work, too much trouble. I don't want to deal with it. Come back when you're 25. So I came back. I think it was the next day. He was outside smoking. I was like, Phil, like, what do I got to do? Like, just give me a shot. Let me prove to you that I'm not like the other 18-year-olds you've tried to apprentice. And he said, I'm going to need $5,000 and I need $1,000 down and we'll set up installments on the rest and you're going to work for free until it's finished. And I said, cool, done. I had usually had $5, give or take, to my name at a time, weighing it between the dollar menu and gas in my car. And I was like, man, I'm going to have to hit a lick somewhere or like, come up with some scheme to get this money. Yeah.
Sell some drugs.
I had a friend that worked at a gas station and, we were talking and I was like, yo, let me like stage something. And he was like, no, man, I'm not comfortable with that.
Anything.
We were scheming. Yeah.
As 18-year-olds do.
A couple of days later. Yeah, exactly. The parts of your brains that tell you that's a bad idea wasn't there yet, I guess.
Hey, all you Artful listeners, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for giving a listen to the podcast. I hope that it's bringing some value to you in your life. That's really why I started this podcast. And if you're getting something useful or valuable out of it, I just want to invite you to go rate and review this podcast. It really helps me out. And it also helps other people find this podcast so that they can get some value out of it. They can feel more free around money and just get some wisdom and some knowledge that we're trying to share on here. So again, I'm not really asking anything else of you other than to just leave a review and rating for this podcast. It really helps me out and helps other people find us. So thanks and enjoy the show.
Yeah, I totaled my car like that week and got an insurance check. It was $2,000 after paying the note off on my car. And I set $1,000 aside for my apprenticeship because that was priority. I was like, I'll bike there. I'll, sleep at the shop, whatever I got to do. I don't need a car. And put $1,000 down on a 92 Coupe de Ville, which was a sick car. I think it was $3,000 back then for that car. So put $1,000 down and went to my parents, see if they'd loan me the rest for the car. And my grandmother ended up loaning me the rest. And went back to the tattoo shop. And they had a contract ready for me. It was a very lengthy contract. I don't remember anything it said. I don't even think I remember reading it because I didn't care what it said. Just, wanted to tattoo. Gave them $1,000 and crossed my fingers that they were going to teach me to tattoo after that. Showed up every day. I was only supposed to be there, I think 3 days a week, they told me, for one shift. We had 2 shifts. It was like a 10 a.m. to like a 2 a.m. shop. And I was there every day that I didn't have another job that I was working. About 6 months in, my mentor told me that everyone there had lost the bet, that they all had bets on how long I was going to last before I quit, and that none of them went over 6 months. So that gave me like a little boost of confidence.
Yeah.
The shop dynamic changed. My next bout with adversity was some of the hires were like pretty violent people, ex-cons, had to deal with, violence a lot, stalking, all sorts of like weird things that to me seemed normal at the time. So I was like, oh, this is just tattooing.
Right, yeah.
Looking back, I'm like, that was kind of messed up. I dealt with that. It was hard. I had a few breaking points. Definitely thought about more crimes, more often than not. But I'm very thankful I was able to regulate myself and push through it and keep my blinders on. Just kept doing what I wanted to do. I quit the band pretty quick. I was like, I can make art, make more money, and not compromise it with 4 other guys. Like, this is what I need. Like, music wasn't really my calling. I was never good musically. Like I said, I enjoyed the managing and the touring, and I did enjoy like performing, but I wasn't a good writer or anything. And tattooing felt right. My apprenticeship was 2 years. Right out of my apprenticeship, I knew I didn't want to be at that shop anymore. Tried to get a job at some other shops. I think because of where I was and my skill level at the time, I got some like half polite no ways, or, come back in a few years. So I opened my first shop, would have been 10 months out of my apprenticeship. We opened the doors.
If I pause you for 1 second, because I feel like there's always some lesson in the hardship and the breakdown and the adversity. What do you feel, was there one main lesson from like the adversity you first faced? I mean, you went 6 months asking a lot of shops, being turned down. I mean, it seems like you learned to hear no and not take no for an answer. One thing I've heard is like, no doesn't mean no forever. It just means no right now.
I like that.
So I don't know if that was a lesson, but what would you say is like the main lessons you learned from that period in your life?
In regards to that, it would definitely be persistence. Right when I was about to give up, I landed an apprenticeship, being persistent. One band I was in, we named after a proverb that goes, it's always darkest just before dawn, and then the dawn will break. I think that kind of ties into it as well. The band name was Dawn Will Break, but
and at the last minute, you
maybe
total
that
your
was
car, and then you get the money. So if you're listening to this
yeah.
and you need some quick cash, just total your car.
just do it right.
Do it right.
Make sure it's totaled.
Really
don't slam on the brakes last minute.
Right.
Yeah, I think through my apprenticeship, the biggest takeaway was patience. I wanted to tattoo from day one, and it was a little over a year before I was able to tattoo. And I'm very, very thankful to my mentor for that. He could have let me tattoo at any time, but he could tell that I needed to learn patience, and he taught me that. Kind of like the more you ask, the longer it's going to be type thing. So finally, I quit asking. Yeah, the day he let me tattoo, it was a walk-in, and he let me color the center of a daisy yellow. He was working on it, and he's like, "Come over here, finish this tattoo." That was like the biggest moment of my tattoo career, of course, at that moment. So yeah, persistence, patience is a good takeaway.
I feel like if colleges didn't teach all the crap that they teach and they just taught patience and persistence, like they'd actually be worth the investment.
It'd be a wild world we would live in. Wow, I've never imagined a patient and persistent world.
I know, yeah.
Which they're kind of opposite if you think about them.
Patience and
you gotta.
Well, they can be opposite, but combined, they're like a fucking force.
Superpower.
Yeah, superpower. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm very grateful. I use both of those lessons daily in my life today. Without those, there's no telling where I would be.
Yeah. And so you open up a shop, and now I want to hear about, like, you told me this story of, opening businesses and then going through like bankruptcy and all this stuff. Tell me about that. That was a really fascinating story. And then hearing what you were able to accomplish after that blew my mind.
Sure. Yeah. So I got married right before my first shop opened. That was cool. I think my wife at the time was a little stressed out about our income stability. I would say the lesson I took away from opening a shop right out of my apprenticeship in a town that I'd never worked in would be confidence. It was the first time I, jumped into the water not knowing if there was like a shark in it. It was kind of like the visual that I remember having. Thankfully, it worked out. But in a few months, I was divorced. And that was kind of like an emotional ego check. I felt like really on top. I was 21. I was like, I got my tattoo apprenticeship. I got my shop. Like, I'm set for life. I'll be here for another 50 years tattooing. It's cool. It's done. I did it. Yeah, I got divorced and had a little bit of equity in a house. We bought a house the same month we got married. Ended up losing all of that. Tennessee's pretty hard on males in divorce. We didn't have any children together, so it was pretty cut and dry. But I had to start over. All I had was my shop at that point. I operated that shop for a few years. I opened a second shop the next town over. When I moved to that shop, I found a really good deal on a house. It was a foreclosure. Bought that and opened a second shop. Was operating both, and then got married again. I ended up selling my first shop because I found out I was having another child with my wife at the time and needed to generate extra income. So I sold the first shop to get a chunk of cash to have like a nice reserve. And then I started traveling full time doing conventions and guest spots because I found that the town that I was in, it was very, very affordable to live in, but it was very low income as well. So it was fine there. But if I could go to like bigger cities where there's more money and, make 2-3 weeks wage in my hometown and a weekend at a convention in another city, that was like a pretty good setup. It was hard on my relationship. I missed, a lot of early days with my son when he was a baby, and that put some strain on that marriage. From there, I decided I needed some stability in a big city. The big cities where the money was. That's when I opened the second Riverside in Boston. So at that point, I had Riverside in Newport and Riverside in Boston. The second location was opened with Dan Tooker. Brought him on as a partner. So we were both 50-50 owners of both locations. Moved my family to Boston. My wife at the time was not happy there. Ultimately, it was drug out. Having a child and a divorce was something that was very like heavy and complicated for me to process.
I'm going through that right now.
It's hard to realize. Yeah. It seems just conceptual until it's done. I was never able to get like a solid visual. I'm like, okay, this will happen if I make this decision, and vice versa. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to share? Share any similarities in your story?
Yeah, just it's a humbling experience. It's not the way
It's a great way to describe it.
It's not the way I expected things to turn out. First of all, I'm eternally grateful for my ex-wife. She's an incredible mother, and she's just like an incredible friend all around, first and foremost. And I am realizing, like, for us to get along and co-parent and what's best for my daughter, I have to put aside a lot of my ego and just sort of say like, yeah, okay, I agree. Sure. great, and like, you have to pick my battles. And I'd say 99% of the battles that I want to pick aren't worth picking. And I think that's the lesson that I'm taking from this experience, getting humble and just being of service to them, and realizing that like the lessons I'm learning here are serving me for the rest of my life. And I have no regrets. I'm eternally grateful for her, for our daughter. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of all I really have to share. And I just can relate to, it's an experience that I hope no one has to go through, but I am looking at it as like, what are the gifts? What are the lessons that it has to offer?
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that you have that perspective. It was really hard for me to come to that perspective. It felt like forever, but it took me a few months. Right before we divorced, we decided to file bankruptcy to wipe out some of our consumer debt that we didn't need. It was about $101,000, which seemed like it would take a lifetime to pay off at the time. And that set me back from real estate investing for a couple of years. My house in Newport that I had was not in my name. It was in a family member's name. So it was protected. Technically, I was renting it at the cost of the mortgage. And then I had no real assets. I had a 31-foot Class A Winnebago that I would travel in, and then 2 vehicles that I would use to commute. I had to give those back. But that was like my first time fully accepting failure, like on my own. Like I failed as a financial manager of my life. I feel like, other failures that I've had involved other people's decisions that were out of my control. But this was the first one that I at least was able to conceptualize owning. It was the first time I felt my ego really like shrivel up. I'd had like some heavy blows to it, but that was the first time I felt it just completely deflate.
I mean, you just want to, like, what I know for me, when I experience anything, and I've never gone through that particular experience, knock on wood, I just want to shrivel up. I just want to run away.
Yeah, it was, fight or flight instincts. It was a very primal feeling. A lot of emotions that are easy to suppress throughout the day were just boiling over constantly. And I was trying to learn how to manage that and also stay strong, as most people, I imagine, do. I didn't want everyone else to feel what I was feeling. So I was trying to, keep a straight face in every interaction. And it was very difficult.
Do you think,
I'm not sure if that was the best decision.
I was just about to ask that. I was like, do you think that was the best thing to... Yeah.
I felt very alone. I was a little bit isolated in that relationship. I had Dan, my business partner, he was my closest friend, and a few other close friends, but I felt at the time that none of them could really relate to what I was experiencing then. So it felt a little alone. Maybe talking to a therapist would have been helpful. I hadn't started therapy. Yeah, we did a little bit of couples therapy, but it was all new to me, and I didn't really take much away from it the first few sessions, just because I always say didn't know what I was hearing.
Yeah, I always say that. This is my experience, that entrepreneurship in general is a lonely experience. I feel that way, at least. Like, I feel like every entrepreneur is on their own journey, and you're lucky if you find people that can relate to your journey or the feelings and the thoughts and the overwhelm or whatever. Yeah, I felt that more in the past recent years as my businesses have grown much bigger than before. It's gotten to be a lonelier road. Do you relate to that at all?
Like, absolutely. And that's a main focus point of my therapy sessions today is like, I have friends, I have family, I have a wonderful partner, I have, children that love me unconditionally, but I don't have anyone that I can just call up or, go have a meal with and talk about what's really going on inside of me and feel like they really understand.
Do you have like a COO of sorts?
No.
Get a COO.
No,
my COO is, I call her my like business therapist. Because when I'm feeling overwhelmed, she's, can be a bit ADD, a bit like hyper focused, and she is, builds the scaffolding to help me build all the things that I'm doing. And when I feel overwhelmed or I'm just like, oh my God, this thing's happening, I go to her and and she costs as much as a therapist too, except I pay her like all day long. So
yeah, that's a helpful bit of advice.
Put an ad on LinkedIn.
I was going to ask if you have a process to meet people like this. I struggle with
I paid for anytime I want to hire people, I'm hiring an assistant right now. I just pay for an ad on LinkedIn. It's like $50 a day and you get a lot of good applicants. So if anyone out there is like looking to hire, but I would say this in general, this was actually advice that was given to me by another person on the podcast, Mike Taylor, who's a pro skateboarder and private equity investor. And he told me,
Okay.
when I told him about my business, I told him what I'm doing now and what I want to do, where I want to take it. I want to have a multi 7-figure business. He's like, as soon as you can, get a COO, get someone that can help structure things and on the back end and do a lot of the, just like the nitty gritty stuff that as the CEO, as the visionary, it's not my cup of tea, you know?
Oh yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So anyway, where were we?
We were at divorce, bankruptcy, rock bottom.
Okay. All that
fully
good stuff.
deflated.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I also had a very, very large alimony and child support bill to add into my daily bills I had already. On top of that, I had to, any savings that I had went towards buying things for my ex, I guess. Like I said, Tennessee's really, really hard. I had to buy her a car, had to pay for education for her. And then I had to pay child support, which was a significant amount for just one child, a significant amount of my income. And so I was trying to stomach how I was going to, have everything stripped from me and then, be beaten down more every month writing those checks emotionally. I decided I needed to make more money so that I could get back to the quality of life I was used to. So I started working a lot more. I was sad, of course, too. I cope with sadness really well by working and by creating art.
Yeah, me too.
So I think I mentioned before, I was doing 80-hour weeks regularly, just stacking as much extra money as I could to buy a small 700 square foot condo in downtown Knoxville. I knew I was going to move Riverside from Newport to Knoxville. I had to get the zoning code changed. That was another adversity. That took 2.5 years, but everything kind of lined up at the end of 2019 for me. I closed on my condo with an FHA loan. It made it super accessible for me. And then
COVID.
The only thing I really, then COVID opened the doors of my shop.
This is not that long ago.
January
I don't know why in
2020.
my mind I'm thinking this is like 10 years ago, but
signed the lease on the shop November 19, opened the doors January 20. People have been asking me a lot lately, like the last few weeks, if that was like a really hard time for me in hindsight to open a business. And looking back, I'm like so thankful that it was then and not, COVID isn't hitting now when I have a much larger operation, because I was able to literally just, scrape by just selling paintings, making merch, maybe doing little side jobs or whatever. And it was like commission art and stuff. It was very easy then. I don't think I'd be able to get by as easily today. I'd probably be doing a lot of liquidating if that happened now.
And so now what have you created, since then, since, apprenticeship and then building things up and then going bankrupt and then starting the studio? I'm curious to hear kind of what you're up to these days.
Dan and I severed our partnership just for functionality reasons. He owns the Boston shop and manages it. I do the same for Knoxville and manage that. And we work at each other's. Yeah. My goal was to make a tattoo studio that I didn't make money on. I kind of discovered generosity, I guess, after my bankruptcy, that I wanted to start giving more. And I kind of thought that maybe these bad things had been happening to me because I was kind of too aggressively taking. I was like, it's not going to hurt to give back. So it was the first shop that I'd ever known of that, doesn't really profit. And I do booth rental. So each artist gets to keep 100% of their earnings and just manage their own business. It got really busy after COVID, and it was just kind of like a stars aligning thing that even with that commitment of like, I'm not going to make money off of this studio, I was able to still continue building my reserves through how busy the economy was for tattooing with, stimulus checks. I think more acceptance of tattooing with like the worker strikes and stuff. There's a lot of people getting their first tattoo in 2020. Yeah. That allowed me to start investing heavily. I had more money than I needed, and I decided I wanted to set myself up to be better than I was, pre-divorce, pre-bankruptcy.
Was there a moment that you decided that?
It wasn't a conscious decision, I don't think. I think it was just like obvious, like, oh, I have more money than I need to live on. I must put it somewhere smart. I guess the conscious part of it came from knowing that rush of business wouldn't last forever. And also the gratitude of, being back at work and having a functioning economy after lockdown. Very fortunate to be in Knoxville. It was the shortest lockdown I know of. I think it was 6 weeks.
Yeah, we were about 4 months here in New York.
Yeah, my heart ached so bad for people in other cities. And, I understood that, each city operates differently and, COVID spread different ways and different rates in different areas. But yeah, I was very thankful to be in Knoxville. We didn't really have a COVID outbreak until well after being opened back up. We don't have an international airport. It's not a huge city. But yeah, the stars kind of aligned for me there. I bought a property, it had been on the market for months as a duplex, and closed on it with a 20% down, just a regular conventional bank loan. I did have to interview several banks to find one that would, listen to me without wanting to see my tax returns first, because my tax returns didn't reflect the income I was making at that moment.
So you were able to interview a couple different banks and
over
20 banks, and with the intention that like they're going to take into account what you have to say in addition to your tax return. Because most banks don't give a fuck what you have to say. More or less. They just want to see the tax return.
I did do quite a bit of research online and on YouTube, figuring out, different loan products, and found what's called DSCR loans, debt service coverage ratio, where if you bring a property to a bank or a structure or a business and you say, hey, this business, this structure, this property is going to make this much money, and that's double what my note would be, will you loan me money for it?
Right.
DSCR banks will say, yes, we could do that for you. And they might have some stipulations. Sure. And as long as you meet those, everything's fine. So I found a local bank that does that. It was the 20-something bank that I reached out to.
Wow.
Yeah, again, the persistence.
Over and over again.
If I stopped at 20, I never would have acquired that property.
Right.
That was in April. And then in July of 21, the Knoxville housing market exploded, as many places did, but Knoxville exponentially. It was a very inexpensive place to live. And I just read Zillow's #1 city projected growth for 2023.
Wow. Right place, right time.
In America, followed by Tampa. Yeah. Again, I started giving back, and then I feel the universe started giving to me.
Yeah.
I continued to leverage property. I would borrow against equity because I could literally just buy a property, wait 6 months for the loan to season, and it had grown 50, 100,000 in value just by holding it. So I continued to buy property until rates started to go up. And at that point, the math was getting harder to check out with the formulas I like to follow. Yeah. So I shifted to small business because the risk is greater, but the returns are typically much greater. That was in 2022. I noticed that tattooing was starting to slow down a little bit more too as the economy was kind of stabling off. So I said, okay, I need to reel it back in, get like some consistent cash flow, stop leveraging, get myself in a more comfortable position so I don't, end up leaning towards bankruptcy again, which you can only file bankruptcy Chapter 7 every 7 years. I hope to never have to do that again, but I'm getting close to that 7-year mark, I guess. I'm not sure exactly. We've got a couple more years, and I could file again if I wanted to.
Well, why? Why would you do that?
I would only do that if I made bad
I
business
see.
deals,
That's like the
if
safety
everything
net.
went south.
Okay, if it all. Does it give you some peace of mind, like knowing that you could like hit the erase button if you had to?
Not so much that. It gives me peace of mind knowing that I can bounce back as quickly as I did the first time, if not faster, with the knowledge I have now.
Right.
That's where I find my peace. As long as I have food and shelter, I'm content. I can work 50, 100 more years, if life expectancy increases dramatically, if I need to. I just don't want to.
This is something I've been contemplating a lot recently. I've had a lot of growth in the past year, business-wise, income-wise, impact-wise, and it sometimes feels like when I opened up my first private studio, and then I got a bigger private studio and had more booths. That was a pretty big jump for me. And you get that stretch, that feeling of oh, can I do this? But I've grown so much so quickly, and it sounds like you had a lot of growth in a short period of time. Then I'm like, oh shit! Can I keep doing this? Do you ever feel that way, or do you ever feel overwhelmed by how big it's grown?
100%. I mean, that's a heavy motivator in, getting to a comfortable financial position to where, if everything in the world went wrong, my happiness and my ability to make free will decisions wouldn't be affected.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if the housing market tanks, I have a lot invested in real estate, and, I lose a significant portion of my net worth, but I hold, 20 to 25% equity in every property. It's got to tank at least that much for me to, sell the house and break even. And if it were to tank more than that, I've diversified intentionally. And, all these little kind of foresights of what ifs, kind of covering my trail on, that gives me the peace of mind. I've created a structure where I have options. If tattooing became illegal and I couldn't, generate income tattooing, I've got backup plans for every what if.
Well, we were just tattoo underground, right? I always take assurance in if, coaching or things that I'm doing don't work out, I can always just tattoo, and that's the best job in the world as far as I'm concerned. So the worst case scenario, I still have the best job in the world.
I wonder if cost of tattooing would go up if it was illegal, like most black markets
Oh,
do, or if it
definitely.
would go down because the interest would go away.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it would go up. I
Yeah.
think it would. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, in that case, I'll be fine.
We're getting close to the end here, and something that was on my mind before we spoke that I wanted to ask you about is like, and I kind of said like, do you enjoy the game? Do you enjoy business? I've been thinking a lot about like, I refuse to be a starving artist. It just is not an option for me. Now, have I been a ramen eating, artist? Yeah, I have. But I am hungry to create, to build, to see what I can do. I want to be tapped out by the time I'm dead and gone. I always wonder, like, is that in everyone? Is that for everyone? Do you feel that way? Do you feel this like hunger, like I'm just gonna get it, Or did it feel like it just sort of arose in you?
I would say I've definitely felt that feeling and still do sometimes, and it comes in waves for me. At some points, I feel that maybe I've done too much, or that a certain part of my body starts hurting, and I know it's from going that being persistent and keeping on when I should call it quits. But then there's other times when I feel everything in my life is perfectly balanced and there's nothing really exciting for me to do. And those are the moments when I'm like, okay, I have to find something else to get into.
Fuck something up now.
I have to raise my blood pressure a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, I would say it's seasonal. And every few months I'll go through a wave, and it's worked out for me so far.
I think that's a good way to look at it too.
Trying to slow down a little more.
It is seasonal. I've been on a let's try to stabilize and slow things down a little bit kick. That's definitely been what I'm looking towards. So
I think economically that makes the most sense.
Economically, yeah, I think absolutely, and where we're headed and things are going. I've built a lot real quick, and now it's like, how do we fortify? So cool, man. Is there any last message or anything you want to leave people off with? I mean, I have some like closing questions I could ask, but just if there's any last message or anything you want to share with people.
Let's hear your questions.
Or do you read books?
I do.
What would you say the 3 books that made the biggest impact on your life are that you'd recommend, and why?
I mean, number 1 is going to be Total Money Makeover, Dave Ramsey. I would say that's a great starting point for anyone that feels financially overwhelmed and wants to like get a grasp on it. I owe that book a lot more than I would ever be able to repay. That really taught me the organizational principles in finance that I needed to start building on and gave me direction. Number 2 would be, I'm going to go with the 4 Agreements. Not so much a finance book, but every aspect of that book, I think, can apply to all areas of life, including finance. And that's one that I like to stay brushed up on every year or so. Check back in with that one because I take something, it's very, very quick one. I take something new every time.
I actually read it fairly recently as one of those books I was always told about. And I read a lot and I listen to a lot of audiobooks. Yeah, I'll be consuming 2 or 3 books at any given time simultaneously, but I did that one recently, and yeah, it was phenomenal. There's a lot of things that I'm maybe familiar with, but like you said, there's no end to that kind of wisdom. It continues to bear fruit each and every time you introduce yourself to it. So
yeah, the 3rd one is I would say maybe Source Field Investigation by David Wilcock. I think it's categorized as sci-fi. There's a lot of factual history in it as well. But that book specifically for me, can't say it may resonate the same with everyone, but it was the first book I read that taught me how to think outside the box, to read between the lines, to really fine-tune the concept of critical thought. And
what's it called again? Source Field?
Source Field Investigations. Yeah, it's kind of like an Ancient Aliens type book, more of like a modern day Chariots of the Gods. But
very cool.
I felt my brain growing as I read that book.
Yeah. I like books like that. I felt that way with another, with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Oh, cool.
Did you ever read that?
I haven't, no.
It's a funny, but it's deeply philosophical. Obviously, it's a very famous book, but yeah, very cool. If people want to get tattooed by you or invest with you or whatever it is that you do, how can people get in touch?
Yeah, the best way to book an appointment, no matter which city I'm in, is through my shop's website, riversidetattoo.club. I have a link to my booking form and my link tree on Instagram, which is Nick Moran Tattooer. I can be reached via Instagram 24/7 with any tattoo questions, investment questions. My email's nickmoraninvestments@gmail.com if you don't have an Instagram. I'd love to talk business or money with anyone there.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you so much. And I've actually had people in my course reach out to you, and you were very generous with your time. So I just want to thank you personally for being that person and sharing with people and sharing your message. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's so fulfilling. I would love to see more people reaching out and, having a coffee for, an hour or two with me. That'd be great.
Amazing. Well, I'll definitely have to come to Tennessee and visit you sometime and
check
out the real estate market down there.
Please do. It's still growing.
Awesome, dude. Still growing. Cool. Good to know. All right, Nick. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed the show. Again, I just want to prompt that if you got some value out of this conversation, please go and leave us a rating and a review on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you saw this podcast. It really helps me out, and it really helps other people to find this podcast. I want more people to have these types of conversations around money so that we can all be more free and at ease and abundant and able to create the lives that we really want to live. So please share this and rate and review. Appreciate it. Thanks.